Hello and welcome to Trees, the Silent Sentinels. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have chosen to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest as we now go in search of trees all around our beautiful island, Barbados. In last week's program, we focused on the Legum Vitae, the pride of Barbados, and the evergreen tree. Today we shall turn our attention to a number of fruit trees around our island from which many of us have been fed.
The wonderful mango tree, found across the tropical world. This tree originated in the Southeast Asia, particularly on the Indian subcontinent, and that is why its Latin name is Mangifera indica, and all of its varieties stem from those wild mangoes which originated in that part of the tropical world thousands of years ago, emerging with very many different types. And of course, it was transported across the tropical world to various botanic gardens in small pots.
Now, having been transported, the mango tree took root in various islands, including Barbados, but the rapidity of its propagation cannot be overlooked. This is a good example of how human beings unknowingly propagate trees all across the island.
But one of the main features and the way that it has been propagated so widely is the fact that it has the advantage of being a very tasty fruit. And this is, even in its original state in Southeast Asia and India, the way in which it was dispersed. You know, we have already seen in this program the way in which trees disperse their seeds either by catapulting them or catching the breeze. But some trees have wonderfully tasty fruit, and by all sorts of animals, including human beings, picking up those fruit, eating them, walking with them, distributing them, taking them, even if they are not specifically planting them, just by dropping them along the way, they then propagate widely across the particular territories where they have been brought.
We cannot ignore the work of the botanic garden in the propagation of this fruit and its later grafting by experts.
And what we find is that botanical gardens from the 18th century, just close to Barbados in St. Vincent, we have the first botanical garden in the Western Hemisphere, set up in St. Vincent just outside of Kingstown. And from there and into other botanical gardens and into propagation centers here in Barbados, particularly during the 19th century, we get a wide variety of mangoes being distributed. And there are some, maybe over 400 varieties are known. And of course, there's the famous grafted mangoes, because some of the root base is not susceptible to disease as much as others. And by grafting on a mango from a particular style or type of fruit, you will then be able to get that kind of fruit replicated. Instead of just trying to think, well, here's a lovely fruit, a grafted mango, a Julie mango as it's called in some places, you put it in to grow, it may not turn out to be that specific type of mango. So this is where grafting comes in, and by grafting a particular mango that you want onto a mango, basic mango stock of, sometimes it's the mango long, for instance, one of the most basic foundation mangoes of them all, you will then get a particular variety.
Many of us have tasted and enjoyed the grafted mangoes, Irwin, Julie and Paui, just to name a few. These are often sought after by shoppers.
And I mentioned about it being transported and grown throughout the tropical world. Here we are at Welch's plantation, and this tree that I'm standing next to, actually, the seed comes from Texas. So we see the transportation of the mango to botanical gardens in Texas, and because of its specific nature, because of the type of fruit, brought here to Barbados and planted here. So we have a Texan mango in Barbados. As you will find if you go around the island, you will find many varieties that have been brought from various parts of the tropical world.
Although it is now one of the most cultivated fruits in the West Indies, the mango tree is not indigenous to these parts of the world.
In Malaya is where we get the origin of the name, where in the Malayan language you have a manaya, and then transferred by the Portuguese and then into English as mango. And so you will find that the European countries adapted that original name to the name that we know today. It first appears in Italian texts in 1510. Now, that is just after the initial arrival of Spanish and Italian navigators, such as Christopher Columbus, into this so-called New World. And so you can understand that the early Spanish settlers in the New World, in the Greater Antilles, brought that mango, which had come to them through the Portuguese, because we also have to understand that shortly after Columbus made his first voyages, the Pope was approached to divide the New World, the newly found world, even the old world of Africa and the new world of the Americas, into two, which part would be owned by Portugal, which part would be owned by Spain. And the African coast and around into the Far East was designated for Portugal. So it's understandable then it's the Portuguese brought it across from India, where they had colonies and trading bases, across to the coast of West Africa, where of course it was very popular indeed, and like so many other plants that we have in Barbados today, brought across along with the slave ships from Africa and planted throughout the islands of the Caribbean.
The mango was such a good crop that it was eventually developed in propagation stations not only in Barbados but throughout the region, where it was distributed to people who were later encouraged to plant more mango trees.
But certainly later on in the 19th century, when agricultural propagation stations were established here, you find specific growths of mangoes being promoted for distribution to the population, because it was such a good crop. I mean, healthy, very edible, full of nutrients, and a great bonus to the nutrition of the population. And even today in Barbados, at places like Codrington and Grove and down in St. Andrew at the agricultural station there, we find mangoes being propagated, and the population who have the space are encouraged to grow mango trees for their own nutritional benefit.
Today we refer to it as mango chutney, but this processed product came out of necessity, having to devise a method of transporting this fruit from the tropics to Europe.
In the early days, before refrigeration, the way that the mango fruit was transported across the world, particularly from the tropical world up into Europe, was as a pickle. So you would do a sort of mango chutney, or simply slice the mangoes and put them into sweet vinegar, and then you would be able to transport those mangoes. And that, of course, changed when refrigeration came in and you were able to refrigerate the fruit.
The mango fruit has been associated with revolutions. Its free growth and abundance of its fruit were the cues for revolutionists to start their wars.
There's an interesting link to mangoes and revolutions in Haiti. One of the generals at the time of Henri Christophe, shortly after the independence of Haiti, is reputed to have said, when you hold a revolution, always hold it in the mango season. Because during the mango season, as the troops would crisscross that country of Haiti with all of its contentions and battles, the troops would be able to benefit from the ripe mangoes growing on the tree and get sustenance for the battles ahead. Always hold your revolutions in the mango season.
In the Caribbean, we have created a mini industry out of the mango, and not only is its fruit eaten directly, it is also prepared in many dishes and juices. Of course, the medical experts often speak of the many benefits of eating mangoes.
And so stories abound about mangoes, and because of their attractive taste, and they are extremely popular in fruit salads and chutneys and various types of seasoning for all sorts, particularly of Eastern foodstuffs. And here in the Caribbean, great use is being made by them, by chefs, for the extension and the enlargement of Caribbean cuisine. The mango, a wonderful fruit, and one that is long-standing in the history of botany in our island here in Barbados.
We have spoken about a number of trees that were brought to the West Indies and planted in St. Vincent and later distributed. Here is a tree that is not very popular in Barbados. However, in recent times it has been gaining interest throughout the island, somewhat part of the acculturation of our people.
The Jamaica ackee has been distributed throughout the Caribbean from Jamaica, where it first came from Africa. And the name is associated with the West African name, Ackea fufu. But the scientific name is linked to somebody that we've come across before, Captain Bligh and the breadfruit, except he did not bring this tree from the Pacific, from Polynesia, from Tahiti to the Caribbean. When he brought the breadfruit in 1793, first to St. Vincent and then to the Botanic Garden at Bath in Jamaica, he came across this ackee, which had already been brought from West Africa to Jamaica. And he took seeds and plants and he brought them to the Kew Botanical Gardens in England. And that is why his name is applied to this tree, Blahia sapida. So here is a clear indication that when he offloaded his fruits from Polynesia, he collected fruits that were uncommon to Kew Gardens in England. He collected them in the West Indies and then brought them on across the Atlantic. And so we can see an example of how, by making a voyage almost completely around the world, a series of fruit were introduced to the botanical world and botanical knowledge. Now, this fruit, coming from West Africa, introduced first of all to Jamaica, was known to the African enslaved, of course, from their association with it in the areas all the way from Senegal right down into Angola. And so it was a popular food even then, and besides that, they had the knowledge of how to take out the poisonous parts, make sure the fruit was mature, that it was not too young, because it is also dangerous if it is eaten too young. And certainly you have to know, even when it is mature, to be able to remove the poisonous sections to prepare the food. Of course, it is extremely popular in Jamaica. Ackee and saltfish is like the national dish. And this brought by Jamaicans because, of course, over the years, particularly during the 20th century, Jamaicans settled in other islands, particularly in the Eastern Caribbean, and brought their favorite fruit with them down here as well. And so a number of associations with this fruit, known link once again with Africa, and through botany, its association with the Caribbean at this time. It has been really interesting throughout this series to find out how many plants that we have here in Barbados are linked to Africa and their sources to Africa and the connection across the Atlantic to their place in Barbados. And this is one of the trees which follows that pattern, the dunk tree, Ziziphus mauritiana. And of course that last part of the scientific name, Mauritiana, is from Mauritania, which is just north of Senegal, on the edge of the Sahara Desert, coming into sub-Saharan Africa. And so we know that this is the origin, the old world tropics, the origin for this tree here. And then if you bring it all the way down through Senegal into what is today the Gambia and Ghana, Nigeria, moving on to Cameroon and then into Angola. So here again, a source which would have been very well known to those people of African descent who lived on Barbados, because it was not a new tree suddenly brought in like the breadfruit, but one that various tribes throughout West Africa had long been associated with. It is a small round fruit, yellow to orange, sometimes even red-brown, and it is common during December to February. So now at this time of year in early March, we find that there are hardly any fruit on. But there's of course another reason for that. They are so popular to be sold and eaten that by March you find that most of the fruit have been removed.
The leaves and parts of the tree have been used for medicinal purposes.
Now, in the African tradition, which was carried across to the West Indies, you find that there are many medicinal uses besides just the matter of a sweet, lovely fruit, bittersweet if you want to eat. The leaves can be eaten and were eaten in certain cases. Young leaves, like salads, were eaten. The fruit was applied to cuts and ulcers as a medicine to cure, an antiseptic of sorts. And then the seeds were as sedatives to halt nausea, so that if you immerse the seeds in hot water and you drank it, your nausea, your feeling of vomit and whatever would go away. And also the leaves were applied as a poultice on areas either with muscle strain or bruises and that kind of nature. To basically, the idea was to suck out the bad humor or tumor of it. The root was a purgative, and also the bark and the oil that came out of the bark were used in various medicinal ways. And infusion of the flowers was used as an eye lotion. So you get all of these applications for various parts of the plant.
We have developed a small industry out of this fruit, and on many spots around the island, and certainly in the urban areas where the tree is not as popular as in the countryside, vendors are seen selling the fruit.
And of course, here in Barbados, from December into February, we find a great social piece of activity related to the fruit. All the wayside vendors packaging these now in plastic bags, formerly in paper bags, and selling them on the roadside. A very popular wayside fruit. And so we find that the fruit itself, eaten raw, but also in certain places pickled, made as a beverage. In the Virgin Islands, it's made into a wine, a very popular wine, which actually is manufactured and sold. It can also be sun-dried, like raisins and sultanas and currants. And in Ethiopia, it is crushed, that is, the leaves are crushed and put in rivers, small streams, and used for stupefying fish, so that you can then stupefy the fish and catch them easily by hand because of the nature of the oil coming out of the leaves and the effect that it has on the fish. And so, because it is of African origin, sweeping all the way from East Africa, the Ethiopia, Tanzania region, right across into West Africa, and from West Africa, once again, on those slave ships, so-called, carrying people of African origin and descent to the West Indies, to Barbados, we get this cultural link between the fruit, the plant, the tree, and the people of Barbados and the wider West Indies.
During the course of this series, we talked about trees as a link to our ancestors, trees and their spiritual link, trees in providing building material, trees as communal spaces, trees for soil retention and coastal preservation, trees as temperature regulators, trees for general beautification, and finally, as in this program, trees as a source of food. Having covered all of these benefits and advantages of planting and having trees in our environment, we now shift focus to highlight what appears to be an all too common and escalating attitude towards trees. Dr. John Webster puts the discussion in context by sharing an experience he had with two Barbadian ladies who did not hesitate to register their dislike of trees.
I have had several instances where quite often elderly people will say they want to take down a tree, they want to get rid of it. And I will ask why. Well, I don't need a big tree with birds around my house. That is often the comment, or people hide in the tree and attack me. One example, not far from where we are here at Gun Hill, there were two beautiful bay leaf trees, and they had a girth which I would probably have a little difficulty putting my arms around them. They must have been there for 80, 100 years. And I saw them starting to cut the trees. And I stopped and I spoke with the lady. And she said, well, we're going to build a house here, so we need to get rid of the tree. I said, okay, well, this one is in the footprint of the house, but what about that one? That's still standing, and perhaps we can save that. And I explained to her the importance of the tree and how beautiful it is and the size of it, that it would be a shame to remove it. Unfortunately, said, we don't want no tree by we house neither. And that was the end of that.
I think Barbadians see trees nowadays as a nuisance. They say it's gonna drop leaves. They say the roots are gonna come and they're gonna damage my foundation. The tree is gonna bring crime to my area because I cannot see, you know, like the four corners of my house. So we are not inculcating the value of trees into younger people. We just see them as a nuisance.
Too much trouble, and then you might have breadfruits dropping and landing on your house and all of these problems. But again, those, you know, there's that thing, those memes going around about first world problems. Those are first world problems. Having food dropping out of a tree and landing on your house is definitely a first world problem, because if it's food, you know, that's like having money dropping from the sky. Nobody's gonna complain, oh my gosh, all this money falling down from the sky, it's so hard to clean up and you gotta burn it. No, because it's valuable. So the problem, I think, is that we really have to see the value in things, and once you can find that value, then it's not a burden.
We treat our trees as badly as we treat our people. And we amputate trees, and you see trees all around the garrison, all of the trees that are dealt with on government property particularly. You see trees with a branch sticking out like that, and that means that the rot will start there and come down the 2 feet to the main trunk and then rot the main trunk, and the whole tree will eventually die.
Unfortunately, that attitude seems to persist today, that trees are a hindrance to whatever we may be doing. And many Barbadians don't seem to appreciate the importance and value of trees. It's a sad fact, but that seems to be what has emerged over time.
You could almost call it a hatred of trees. Yes, if a tree has some sort of food advantage, whether it be mangoes or other trees of that kind, yes, there would be a concession, they would remain. But trees, just for the sake of trees, very often there's this great suspicion about them. And one of the main reasons, of course, is the fact of storms and hurricanes. The fear that tropical storms blowing through the island will send branches and perhaps the entire tree on some of the smaller, particularly wooden houses. And so because of this fear, because of this concern, you will find that people do not like trees around their houses at all.
So Barbadians don't like trees because they can get into walls and pipes and damage buildings. That is the big reason number one. Barbadians don't like trees because it means you have to care for them. If the tree becomes too big, you may have to trim it. If a branch dies, you have to cut it. And you basically have to look after a tree as a part of a garden. It's a living organism as you look after people. We don't know how to deal with trees, and there's no public education about this. Maybe I should write a column about it. And you see home after home. You see public spaces. You see car parks concreted over. You see gardens concreted over. Because people say, I don't want the trouble of having to deal with any form of plant life. Give me concrete. Why else don't we like trees? Because we don't understand their value. We don't understand their value in a country with trees for attracting rain and maintaining a pleasant environment. We don't understand their value in giving us shade when we're out of doors and protecting us from the damage of the sun. And we can all get skin cancer. Bob Marley, after all, died of a malignant melanoma. The bread and butter of dermatologists in the Caribbean, as in Australia, is the skin cancers. And so trees protect us from that. They help to provide shade. Trees are obviously environmentally friendly, and I don't have to go into all the climatological issues there, but trees are also beautiful.
So for a variety of reasons, we get this aspect, this concern about trees. One, a defense of them, usually by people who are a little more open to this concept of having trees around their houses. And the other, from a pure economic and to a certain extent social point of view of having the area concreted at all, because in a way, bush is something that you want to avoid. Socially, you want to get away from bush. You want to show that you are moving up in the world, and that bush in some way indicates that you are rural and countrified. There are aspects of this, some people may disagree, but the point of the matter is that you have various attitudes towards trees across the social spectrum of Barbados.
Barbadians will kill you for their decorative plants. I mean, they'll come into my yard and break off my plants, you know, snow on the mountain, etc., etc. But trees, no. I think we have an aversion to trees. There is that impatience with trees. Trees take 10, 15, 20 years to grow. A coconut tree, the large variety, will take 15 years to come to maturity. 10 years before it starts bearing. The smaller ones will take about 7 years. So there's that now for now, as the Trinidadians call it, that urge. Instant gratification. And you can get instant gratification in terms of flowers and flowering plants, not with trees. Trees are like children. A child grows to adulthood in 18 years. A tree probably in 15. I don't think we have that kind of patience. The area of greatest, to my mind, greatest mystification. How on earth could a Barbadian and an agricultural community, which is short of a lot of resources, how on earth could Barbadians cut down fruit trees? All of our gooseberry trees have gone. Cherry trees have been cut down. Breadfruit trees have been cut down. Mammy apple trees have been cut down. Avocado pear trees, and most of all, golden apple and mango trees are cut down every day in this society. You know, and if you go through the island, as I do, taking people on tours, you see where these trees have been cut down. And they are not replaced. That's the point. They're not replaced.
This is certainly not what anyone would wish to have as the subject of any discussion on trees. But as you have heard, it is reality and has been the experience of our guest on today's program. All experiences, of course, shared by many of us. Hopefully, this program is doing something to help turn those negative attitudes into positive ones. Until next week at the same time, I'm Sherwood McCaskey, and it's goodbye for now.